Spinning records, got the lights down low. Souldisco's where the groovy people go. Hit play, let the music flow. Old school beats with a modern glow. Oh.
Hello everybody and a very warm welcome back to the latest episode of Hidden Jewels of Soul and Disco. I do hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. In this week's episode, we're featuring Annette Snell. Usually at this part of the video you see me diving right into the history of each and every artist. But I wanted to take this opportunity for a personal note of mine. I wanted to feature Annette Snell since I started my YouTube channel Souldisco. So back then I made my research, made phone calls, verified information, and every time I tried to attempt taping the certain episode featuring Annette Snell, I was close to tears every single time. Therefore I said, I'm going to do it next week, I'm doing it next month, so now it's been years. My mindset about this story hasn't changed a bit, and at this moment I also want to send out my deepest condolences to everybody who lost a loved one on that fateful day in April 1977, and all my best wishes to the survivors of this tragic accident. What changed now, and that's why I think I should do the video now, is that some time ago I posted some song snippets from Annette Snell on my YouTube Shorts section and also on Instagram. And that led to literally exploding my mailbox. Like, who is she? Where can I find her records? Why is she not on Spotify? What record do you recommend? And there was also a lot of messages regarding her final recordings. Because one caption of a YouTube short I made was, hey, I'm listening to a final recording of Annette Snell. And there is a kind of rumor or mystery about her final recordings, and I want to put the record straight concerning this rumor. Therefore, I beg your pardon if I may seem a little off in this episode, but like I said, it's still, and it always will be, a very tragic story for everyone who was involved. Not just Annette Snell alone, but her family and everybody who was a victim of that day. Therefore, let me introduce you to the life and legacy of Annette Snell. Annette Snell was born on March the 22nd in 1945 in Miami, Florida. Some sources will state that she was born in Sandersville, Georgia, but during my research I tend to believe that she was actually born in Miami. There is not much information available what happened between her birth and her getting in a backing vocal group in the early 60s. But I found a news clipping from the Herald News from 1972 which states the following. A native of Miami, Miss Snell began her singing career at the age of 6 in the kiddie choir of her church. In addition to appearing in Dallas and Philadelphia, Miss Snell has sung for the United States troops in the Philippines and Thailand. She is a member of the Mount Zion Young Adult Choir. This is the only information I could find about Annette between her time from being born and becoming in the early 60s a member of the backing vocal group, the Marvels. And you have to consider, back in those days, there was no social media, there was no internet, there was no easy way to get yourself out there, to promote yourself. So you had to do gigs in restaurants, in bars, in clubs. Actually, you took every opportunity to perform, to get your name out there. From the Marvels, she moved to the vocal group The Fabulous, and she was a member of that group between 1965 and 1968. In that time, the group released a couple of singles. For example, Mr. Policeman and Screaming and Shouting. In 1968, Annette left the group because she wanted to start a solo career. So she went to New York, she went to Nashville, but it actually took till 1970 and meeting Paul Kelly till her career really got a boost. In 1970, she released a single which was called Since There Is No More You, which was also a collaboration with Paul Kelly. Paul Kelly, who is a legend on his own, and we will of course feature him in future episodes of Hidden Jewels of Soul and Disco, was so impressed with her talent that he introduced her to publisher and producer Buddy Killen.
This is Don Cusick with the Music Biz, and today I have with me Buddy Killen, who is the head president, chief executive officer, chief cook and bottle washer at Tree International Publishers, one of the biggest publishers in the world. Buddy, how'd you get started in the music industry?
Well, I was a musician down in Florence, Alabama. I grew up learning to play music, put little bands together throughout high school, working dances, square dances, any place that we could. And when I was right out of high school, I graduated on Friday. On Sunday, a friend of mine called me and said, "Hey, you want a job?" I said, "I sure do." So I came to Nashville and went to work on the Grand Ole Opry.
More singles followed, especially her 1973 hit, You Ought Be Here With Me, which was also a Paul Kelly collaboration. And here you can see a picture of her promoting that very single. Two other singles followed, Get Your Thing Together and Just As Hooked As I Have Been. All releases on the Dial label. Now we have a gap between 1974 and 1976. There were no single releases from Annette. But of course she continued to work. She was on TV programs. She appeared with The Moments and the High Crown Affair, and also she continued to perform as a gospel singer. In early 1977, Jimmy Johnson and Roger Hawkins, who are both Muscle Shoals legends, got a phone call from a vice president from Epic Records. And the vice president said, "You know, guys, I have up here this upcoming singer and we want you to produce her debut album." And Jimmy and Roger listened to her material and they were thrilled about what they heard, and they were really excited to work with her. On March the 28th in 1977, Annette Snell stepped into the studio of Muscle Shoals.
Welcome to Muscle Shoals, Alabama, the home of the world-famous Muscle Shoals sound.
Muscle Shoals, Alabama.
and within 3 days they recorded 4 songs. Promises Should Never Be Broken and It's All Over Now, written by Jerry Weaver. Tonight, I Feel Like Dancing, which was written by George Jackson, who also wrote classics like Old Time Rock and Roll. This track, as it was not released by Annette Snell, was later given to Marva Staples, and she released her version of that song in 1979. The other track in that session was Oh Baby, I Think I'm Falling in Love, which was written by the legendary Philip Mitchell. Who took part in these recording sessions? Who were the musicians? Who were the backing groups? Well, let's get into that. To start with, we have the famous Muscle Shoals rhythm section. And we have the Muscle Shoals horn. As the backing vocals, there was Ava Aldridge. She was also an arranger and also a songwriter. And she was supposed to provide at least 1 or 2 songs for the next planned session for Annette to record. On guitar, Peter Carr, and the arranger for the strings was Mike Lewis from the Criteria Studios in Miami. Those people laid the groundwork for the tracks, and Annette put on the leading vocals. They were done with the groundwork, let me call it that way, on Wednesday. On Thursday and Friday they did some vocal repairs, some overdubs, and continued to work on those 4 tracks. Annette stayed with Jimmy's family because at that time all hotels were booked out, so Jimmy and Annette became friends. On Sunday, she asked Jimmy if he could book her the first flight on Monday for her to go home. Jimmy booked her on flight Southern Airways flight 242. On Monday morning, she went to the studio at Muscle Shoals, said goodbye to everybody, and was driven to the airport by a Muscle Shoals employee. At 3:32, her plane, a DC-9, took off from Muscle Shoals Airport, but it would never reach its final destination.
Good evening. Port Harris is sitting in for Missy Ming this evening, who is helping in the preparation of the Action News 19 special at 6:30, Disaster at New Hope, Georgia. The death toll from yesterday's Southern Airways Flight 242 has now reached 68. The latest fatality is 50-year-old Glenn Bradley of Richmond, Virginia. In the meantime, federal investigators said today they believe the pilot of the Southern plane, Captain William McKenzie, was trying to land the aircraft when the crash occurred. Preliminary review of the wreckage indicated the plane's landing gear was down with the flaps in the landing configuration. McKenzie nearly succeeded in landing the plane on Highway 92 just outside New Hope, Georgia, but one wing smashed into a telephone pole, sending it skidding across the road into a small grocery store. 2 gasoline pumps were sheared off, causing an explosion, the fire killing several New Hope residents. The plane then cartwheeled into a stop at a wooded area and suddenly burst. Now we have a listing of the unknown. This is people that we do not know the exact condition or what has happened.
On Monday afternoon, Jimmy was working in the studio with Peter from Peter, Paul and Mary. And a colleague rushed to him and told him, "Jimmy, you need to pick up the phone immediately. It's your mother, and she's screaming." When Jim picked up the phone, his mother informed him that his younger brother Earl, who was a very successful engineer, was on flight 242 and that the plane had crashed. It sank to him during the conversation with his mother that Annette was on that very same flight. Jimmy and his family rushed to Atlanta to the Grady Hospital to be by Earl. Earl died 28 hours after the crash, surrounded by his family due to the severe injuries from the crash. Annette's family was hoping that she's still alive because they thought they saw her on some news coverage footage walking around the crash scene. But that wasn't her. Annette's funeral took place on April the 9th in 1977. When you lost a loved one, especially being a parent, you really don't want to deal with the insurance company. But in this case, you had to. And it was Lloyd's of London. Lloyd's wanted to give Annette's family the minimum amount as a compensation. And Jimmy was furious. So they hired a lawyer, and Jimmy went to the federal courthouse of Atlanta. And Jimmy testified in front of Lloyd's of London. Annette's family's lawyer made sure that everybody in this room knew who Jimmy was, with what kind of artists he worked, and in how many hits he was involved with. And the list was almost endless. And here is a snippet from an interview what Jimmy had to say about this moment. That's really another thing that really bothered me about Lloyd's of London. Trying to pay her as if she were a tiny baby with all the talent she had, and how vibrant she was. She was so full of talent. To us, we felt like she had a big future ahead of her. When I went over there and testified, it was my job to let them know how great she was. They wouldn't let me play her music. Lloyd's of London refused to let me play it. I wanted to, because I would have had them. But I had them anyway, so it didn't really matter. I was really shook up about it, not only because I was there for Annette, but because I felt like I was there for my brother too. Lloyd's of London was so impressed by Jimmy's speech that they gave Annette's family even more money. Money can never replace a human being, but when you're in a tragic situation and you need to pay bills for the funeral and other things, it really helps at least a tiny little bit. So what happened to Annette's recordings from Muscle Shoals, the 4 tracks I mentioned earlier? There's this rumor, there's this mystery about these recordings. I've heard this story for at least 10 years in different, slightly different variations. So here I want to point out an example what can happen over time if the facts are not correct. And here's a news clipping from the Atlanta Journal from April 1977. The day did not begin well for Annette Snell. The weather was terrible, her friend was late, and she had to be in New York by nightfall. And an aspiring singer, the tall, striking 25-year-old woman, had to come to Muscle Shoals to do a recording at a local studio. Now she was going home. She did not really want to leave, she told a friend at Muscle Shoals Sound Productions. I have an urge not to get on that plane. She confided to Diane Butler at the studio. But I guess I have to. Shortly before the flight time, Earl Johnson of the studio came for her, mumbling his apologies. Together, they would drive to the airport. Be good, and I'll see you soon, she told the clerks of the hotel in which she had stayed. I have my issues with this article, but as you can see, when time goes by and people read that today, oh, they would think, oh, she met Earl and oh, she didn't want to take that flight. Well, the thing is, let's not talk about the fact that they got their age wrong. I've read many articles where her age was wrong. This can happen. Back in the day, you didn't find enough information soon enough, so you might tend to guess maybe. Or it was taken from another article who got the age wrong in the first place. That's no big deal. The thing is, she never met Earl. Earl was never an employee of Muscle Shoals. He didn't drive her to the airport. The weather was not terrifying or terrible in Muscle Shoals. When the plane took off, the DC-9 took off from Muscle Shoals at 3:32, the weather was no problem. They had a second hub where they landed, and this was in Huntsville, and they made it to Huntsville without any issues. The problem began when they took off from Huntsville and got into a terrible hailstorm. And that led to the fact that both engines flamed out and the DC-9 became a giant glider. So many aspects of the story are not accurate. So, and like I said in the beginning, if you read this and, it kind of becomes common knowledge. And the same, I think, happened with the story of the lost master tapes. What is the story like? And I've heard numerous variations of that story over the years. So the story is, when Anne boarded the plane on Monday afternoon, she was in the possession of the master tapes of all the recordings she did at Muscle Shoals. And when the plane crashed, the recordings were lost and destroyed forever. And this story was always very odd to me on many aspects. So first of all, why would you give an artist the master tapes? To take home with? Storage wasn't a problem. Did she wanted to listen to her recordings? Well, that might have been the case. So she needed to get home and find a player to play multi-track tapes or go into another studio and listen to them there. Back in the day, if you wanted to listen to your recordings, you got an acetate from the studio or a cassette tape. So this made no sense to me. The second thing what could have happened is that she wanted to finish the recordings or the album in another studio nearby. But that wasn't also the case. She was due to be back for the finishing session, the second session, within 60 days. Also, producers tend to keep on working the tracks even if the artist is not there. They add backing vocals, they change something, so they couldn't do this without the master tapes. And the other point is, if you remember my statement or the thing I read to you about Jimmy's and his testifying, he clearly stated that he wanted to play the recordings to Lloyd's of London to prove his point, which they refused. In this context, it makes no sense to testify and say, hey, listen, I play your recordings from like 5 or 10 years ago to prove my point. Of course, he would have played the songs she recorded before she died to prove his point that the album was very likely to becoming a big hit, as well as Annette Snell. So many aspects didn't work for me in the story. But what happened? So the master tapes never left Muscle Shoals. After Annette's funeral, Jimmy got in touch with Epic and asked them, what do you want us to do with the material we have? We have 4 tracks, we could complete 4 songs. What do you want us to do? And Epic decided that they finish the songs. So I can't imagine what it must have felt like for Jimmy sitting in the studio, losing his brother, losing a dear friend, listen to her vocals, looking through the window in the studio and seeing the spot where she was just weeks before recording those vocals. The songs were finished and Epic decided to release 2 of the 4 songs. And these 2 songs were Promises Should Never Been Broken and It's All Over Now. They even included a catalog number for an upcoming EP, which of course never happened. Epic said we want to use the minimum budget for promotion, according to Jimmy. If she would have been a huge star, you can be sure that they would have gone all the 9 yards to get all the promotion out there. It's the same kind of thing which happened to Otis Redding back in the day, to get as much profit out of it as possible. With Annette Snell, she was an upcoming singer, not really famous. They wouldn't have done this. But up to this day, I'm still very thankful that Epic released this single, because I think it's very important, or was very important for her family, for her friends, to hear her sing on this recording, at least the final recordings she did. We have 2 tracks left. In 2023, those 2 tracks were released on Soul for Real, Annette Snell, I Think I'm Falling in Love, and Tonight I Feel Like Dancing. So if you want to have all 4 songs recorded by Annette Snell on her final session, you need to buy these 2 singles. I wish somebody would have done an EP so we have all the tracks on one single, or maybe this is a suggestion for Record Store Day, or get a proper compilation from Annette Snell out there with a nice cover art for everybody to enjoy. I would highly suggest that. I would also highly suggest for those of you who don't know Annette Snell that you check out her music. I promise you, you won't be disappointed. Also, for me personally, is Annette Snell died in 1977. We are now having 2024. We're still listening to her music. New fans discover her music. She is loved all over the world. People enjoy her recordings. For me, this is like talent stands the test of time. And with Annette Snell, that sure is the case. I'm wishing you all the best, and thank you for watching.